Dobar dan, dobrodošli za drugi dan našeg seminara. Danas će Sep da otvori sa predavanje od oko 45 minuta o umetnici kao prekarijata i razne forme angažovani umetnici. I posle toga će biti diskusija, tako očekujemo ili zamolimo vas svima da učestvujete. Hvala, evo Sep će da...
Okay. Thank you, Noah, and thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, ULUS, for inviting me to be here. So I see a few new faces, so I'll just introduce myself quickly again. My name is Sep Ekenauze. I live in Amsterdam, where I work as a researcher at the Institute of Network Cultures, which is a part of the Amsterdam University of Applied Science. And I also work as a researcher at PIROT, which is a research group at the St. Joost Academy of Art and Design. And I've been working with ULUS on this project for the International Artists Cooperative as a European partner. And as such, I've been invited here, and I'm really honored to... Oh, don't drop the... dropping the art immediately. It's fine, I hope. I've been invited here to come and put some things on the table to kind of, let's say, run the diagnostics of what exactly is going on in the arts, and what is the shared condition that we have as people working in the arts throughout Europe, and what are the different kinds of terms, words, numbers we can use to identify what's going on. So I prepared this, about 45-minute lecture called Precariat, Entreprecariat, Projectariat, Cybertariat, Cognitariat, Affectariat on the organization of artists in primer crisis. I first wanted to call it In Defense of Our Poor Life Decisions, but I didn't want to make it too personal. But yeah, here we go. If you have questions, please also feel free to interrupt me. I got a little cold, so I'm in the scarf. But slower, okay. For the translation. Yes, I understand. If also at any point I'm unclear, please just indicate, and I can always repeat or slow down. But we can go to the next slide. I don't know if you can read this. It's a Google search which says, why are artists? And the suggested results are sad, so weird, skinny, so messy, so moody, bad at math, so sensitive, so pretentious, different. So if you're an art worker, you have probably been accused of making bad life decisions by your family, by your childhood friends, and probably also by a bunch of random people who felt entitled to ask you these questions just because you happened to be at the same party. And I hate to say it, but they were not really wrong. The art economy is fundamentally unsustainable. Underpayment and unstable working conditions are normalized to the extent that artistic labor is nearly always precarious. And so becoming an artist or something else in the arts is really an awful career decision. We can go to the next slide as well. So this is silent footage, so I'll just talk over it while you enjoy the view of Belgrade. So on the 28th of October 1980, the 21st General Conference of the UNESCO convened in Belgrade, and they observed that, I quote, "We need to improve the social security, labor and tax conditions of artists," and they formulated the so-called recommendation concerning the status of the artist, or the 1980 recommendation for short. And this recommendation encouraged member states to, quote, "create the material conditions facilitating the release of creative talent." The proposed measures included universal basic access, so buckle up because it's a whole list of proposed measures in 1980. Universal access to culture, promotion of consumption of culture, improved vocational training for artists, funding programs for artists and art institutions, artistic copyright law enforcement, income support for beginning artists, artist fee regulations, the creation of decent side jobs for artists, maintenance of cultural infrastructure, tax exemptions for commissions, sales, and imports of artworks, free or affordable insurances for artists, stimulation of international cooperation, freedom of international travel for artists, protection of child artists, and extra support for women artists and artists with a minority background. The recommendation was accepted with unanimous support by all of the member countries. So, what was striking to me reading this recommendation a while ago is that this kind of mixed bag of social support measures and market incentives that was written in 1980 could have just as well been written yesterday. And I think this is kind of indicative of a diffuse vision of the role of art in society that still exists today among policymakers, party ideologues, lobbyists, union leaders, and to be fair also among people working in the arts. So from 2020 until 2023, I worked for a small Dutch artist organization, which is called Platform BK. We would participate also next to a grassroots organization and organizing events, publishing articles. We would participate in these kind of lobby circuits of NGO meetings and policy agenda setting. And I noticed how a lot of the conversations revolved around making the art market more fair by, for instance, focusing on artists' fees. And instead of demanding a serious social program for all art workers or all workers for that matter, the representatives would always try to be pragmatic and constructive. They would try to keep good relationships with people in government, thereby hoping to somehow make sure that they would get a little bit more funding here, a little bit more funding there. And of course, whenever they would be successful, this would have a real impact on the real life of real artists. So I understand them, I was them, and I also think they do important work, and I think they continue to do important work. But also in hindsight, I have to notice how marginal and devoid of vision these conversations often were, and that they never really touched on the systemic issues, and that this also really shows. Because in 2018, almost after 40 years after the 1980 recommendation of the UNESCO took effect, the UNESCO again commissioned an international survey to monitor the structural effects that the recommendation had had. And it turns out there weren't many. Some progress had been made in digital copyright, social security. By the way, this 40 years later report was the one that also was quoted in the invitation or the program of this meeting today. So that's also the background of that report. Some progress has been made in digital copyright, social security for artists in the global south, regional collaborations and the anti-gender gap policies, but structural problems have only grown. Artists still struggle with low and uncertain payment, pension poverty, censorship, and a large persistent gender pay gap. Also, artists today are facing new problems. For instance, restricted access to opportunities because of platform monopolies, digital surveillance, and increasingly violent anti-migration policies. These problems occur everywhere, but are the worst in the global south. And just to be very clear, these are not my observations. These are the official UNESCO observations, right? And this report beautifully sums up the resulting situation in one single sentence. And I quote, "The largest subsidy for the arts today comes not from governments, patrons, or the private sector, but from artists themselves in the form of unpaid or underpaid labor." End of quote. So, we have to conclude that 40 years of resilience programs focusing on creative industries development, cultural entrepreneurship, and the instrumental value of art have not managed to improve the income position of art workers at all. However, we would be wrong to conclude that these policies did not have any effect whatsoever. They successfully turned artists into the guinea pigs of neoliberal precarization and flexibility. With its consistently rising numbers of self-employed workers, art and culture have proven to be the perfect testing ground. We can go to the next slide as well. Have proven to be the perfect testing ground for the policies of flexibility and precarity that are the core of the neoliberal economic project. If there is any claim to avant-garde, okay, this is my claim. If there is any claim to avant-gardism today for artists, it's that of being the flex work avant-garde. I'm not saying that we must return to the old labor market model of permanent contracts for everyone, But it is clear that the neoliberal ideas of the labor market, striving for deregulation and a small government, are completely bankrupt, and it shows in the arts. So, still, throughout these decades, artists stayed motivated, they kept on working, they kept on creating, and the cultural production of museums, galleries, fairs, magazines, and auctions has continued to flourish. It is often even assumed that there is like a causal relationship between these two things, between the hardships and the productivity of artists. That creativity, in fact, equals the ability to survive with little financial means. Artists and cultural workers supposedly use their creativity to develop creative revenue models. They independently make something out of nothing, as if they are gods. In the book that you see here on the screen, Why Are Artists Poor, by Hans Abbing, who is an economist and an artist, Abbing describes this kind of idea that you create something out of nothing and that this is actually expected of artists as the art ethos. So the axioma of art ethos is one does not become an artist because of financial gain, but because of the pursuit of one's dream or even to fulfill one's destiny. And in that sense, poverty is proof of the real deal. If you're not willing to be poor, how can you even claim to be an artist, right? We can go to the next slide. However, I read the opposite in these facts. Creativity is a means to continue producing despite persistent precarity and underpayment. As an individual quick fix for a collective problem, the lack of subsistence security, creativity hides the structural nature of precarity rather than remedying it. So sometimes I've wondered, what would happen if we all just stopped creatively hiding the structural nature of our precarity with individual quick fixes? What happens if artists and freelance workers, who are the backbone of the art world, simply refuse to live on a pittance any longer, collectively? If cultural workers were the first, the fastest, and the most thorough in becoming flex workers, can they also become the first to move on beyond the current precarious situation? But then, after fantasizing a little bit, I always quickly remember that such dreams are unlikely to become a reality. Artists are notoriously bad at organizing, and this is also largely true. The problem of artists organizing is the classic issue of the little person, producing in an extractive system that they struggle to understand, let alone control. They experience a huge dissonance between their practice, which is often informal, precarious, low-paid, and self-organized, and the big money and the splendor seen in art fairs, blue-chip galleries, and auction houses. Hans Abbing, once again, has called this schizophrenia the Janus phase of the art world. Artists somehow think that the market is not where their practice is, and their practice is not where the art market is. I'm reminded of a friend, artist, who told me about an opening that, who told me about a dinner she went to with patrons of an art exhibition that she was participating in, and there were champagne, lobsters, she enjoyed it. She had nice conversations, and then she went back home to eat dry crackers again for a week because she couldn't afford anything else. And looking back at this kind of dissonance, she felt that there had been a mix-up, that she was part of something that she had not been supposed to be a part of. But of course, we know that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and this is exactly the structure of the art world. And if we go to the next slide. I think I mean, it's kind of a popular book. It's very easy entry, but I think Sarah Thornton in 7 Days in the Art World very beautifully has narrated how the art world circuits of art studios, art education, magazines, auctions, galleries, fairs, and art prizes are seemingly separate, but actually all connected and interdependent. And if we go to the next slide again, I wanted to bring up this book, Dark Matter by Gregory Cholette, who went even several steps further and showed how unsuccessful artists, he calls them pre-failed artists, because they're actually educated to fail from the very start, that they are the dark matter of the art world. To identify successful artists worthwhile of astronomic investment, the art market actually needs to be able to discern the contrast between successful artists with potential and a much larger group of failed artists. in terms of market. So unsuccessful artists are therefore the dark matter, the invisible connective tissue churned out by art academies in large quantities without whom the entire system would implode, which then also suggests that there's a large power with this dark matter, right? So art workers, in short, are a fundamental part of a system that they feel fundamentally disconnected from and that structurally keeps them precarious. How to break this wheel of disorganization? How to collectivize and resist? If one thing is clear, it's that art workers are not simply workers in a clearly identified working class, as Noah also reminds us oftentimes. That leads us to wonder, what are they? What is the social class position of artists? Who are their comrades and who are their adversaries? Next slide, please. So to make the material position of artists in the Netherlands a little bit more clear or tangible, I participated in organizing the campaign For Our Heroes in 2020. As you can see here, or not see here, artists in the Netherlands in 2019 earned an average gross income of 18,340 euros, which is just over half of the income of an average garbage collector and 28 times less than the top executive of the Royal Dutch Airlines without bonuses. On the next slide, we actually have a link that you can click. Then maybe if we make this larger. And if you click on the right half of the page, no, yeah, okay, well. So on the very right, you see the CEO of KLM. We actually wanted to first have the CEO of bol.com or booking.com, which are companies in the Netherlands, platform companies in the Netherlands, but actually that would still be 20 times higher. We could not possibly physically build that. So we opted for the CEO of KLM. Here at this end, you have, at the very left, there's the shelf clerk of a supermarket. So someone filling the shelves in the supermarket. Then right next to it is the artist. Then is the garbage collector. I have to do this from the top of my head because I can't even read it from here. But maybe, you can't see it? No? Oh, okay. There is, on this side, there is the police officer and journalist, and a little bit to the left is the nurse, the teacher, and, sorry? You get the point, I guess so, yes. But if we zoom in a little bit, the opposition we observe, the largest one is obviously not between artists and shelf clerks or nurses, but between the regular jobs on the left and the high-ranking official or managers on the right-hand side. And we can also see that artists are highly educated and skilled, providing them with better bargaining positions in selling their labor. In other words, they are typical middle class, like journalists and police officers, but their income position puts them right between the blue-collar workers on the very left-hand side. Of course, if we had been able to somehow measure capital rather than income from labor, the resulting image would have been much more extreme, but we've just focused on income in labor here. And to come to my personal conviction, the message that I take from this, which I will elaborate later, artists and art workers should be in solidarity with workers in other parts of the foundational economy if they ever want to emancipate as workers. So if we go to the next slide, I have to talk very briefly about this idea of the art worker, which I've been using several times now, and I understand it needs some clarification. The idea that there is something like an art worker emerged originally during the constructivist and productivist avant-gardes of the 1920s, and it was closely linked to the socialist realist aesthetic positions during the Popular Front era, such as the Congress of Cultural Workers in Lviv, where artists and writers declared their solidarity with workers in the 1930s. Only much later, in 1969, it was taken up in the West by the New York-based Art Workers Coalition. Today, people working in the arts make sure to engage in politically correct discourse around diversity and inclusion, and also to show affinity with the working class, a development that I believe is related to the rise of social art practice. This could mean that art worker as a term is just another trendy buzzword used to improve the social status of the artist. On the other hand, I know many artists that would consider themselves as social servants or service providers for social movements. If we go to the next slide, I mean, Alina is maybe one of them, but we've discussed her in depth in the previous event, so I'm not doing that now. But here we see an image of work by, or not a work, just work by Matthijs de Bruyne, a Dutch artist who has been for a long time working with the Dutch Domestic Workers Union, designing their campaign material. This kind of work then suggests, could there be more to the idea of an art worker, an actual political outlook? Well, this question is explored by Mia van den Bos in the essay In a Class of Our Own, Art Workers in the Working Class, and the Working Class. Coming from a working class background herself, Mia is intuitively attracted to the term art worker, but she's also cautious because the problem, and I quote, "The problem with the term art worker is that it gestures towards while simultaneously revealing nothing about class. Art worker elides different class positions behind the precarious reality of freelance workers, without recognizing that a class-based selection process has already occurred before the first invoice is ever sent." End of quote. For instance, she also brings this up, a 2023 report of the British Sociological Foundation shows that only 8% of artists today have a working class background. Still, Van den Bos argues, the concept of the art worker is a useful one because, I quote again, "it is broad and collective and opens up space for solidarity among art workers as well as with other precarious gig workers." End of quote. She concludes, one last quote, "In order to harness the potential of this common terminology, we need to openly and compassionately talk about class, how it dictates who can and who cannot afford to make, write about, or curate art, and therefore what kind of class interests and perspectives are furthered in the art world." End of quote. I agree with Van den Bos, and I'm happy also to have noticed that we don't have to start this kind of open and compassionate conversation from scratch. Many thinkers have theorized possible pathways to a new class consciousness that encompasses the strange position of the artist with its many cognitive dissonances. So, okay, this is a bit the diagnostics of the numbers and the position. Now I go into theories of different theoreticians that have kind of come up with new concepts to deal with this. So we can go to the next slide. Definitely the 1.0 version of these new conceptions of class must be the precariat. The precariat is a social class formed by people suffering from precarity, which means existing without predictability or security, affecting material and psychological welfare. Observing the general trend of flexibilization in the post-40s neoliberal labor market, the American economist Guy Standing has described the precariat as the new dangerous class. Unlike the proletariat of the 20th century working class, who lack their own means of production and hence sold their labor to live, members of the precariat are only partially involved in labor and must undertake extensive unremunerated activities that are essential if they want to retain access to their jobs and to decent earnings. Classic examples of such unpaid activities include continually having to search for work and being expected to perpetually be responsive to calls for gig work without actually being paid for being on call. In the case of people working in the arts, we all know these activities, right? Always you have to be visible, you have to go to all the openings, you have to rewrite your CV and portfolio all the time, you have to update your website, reinvent yourself to, remain hot, and work for status rather than money in many cases. Of course, in this vein, we can remark that artists are part of the precariat, but they're definitely not the only members of the precariat. Also important to mention here is that the idea of the phenomenon of the precariat, at least precarity, everyone understands that it exists, but the precariat as the new dangerous class is under a critique of various people saying that it is way too loose to actually denote any kind of social coherence between the people that make up the precariat, and also that even though different people might be dealing with the same kind of insecurity, they might have very, very different kinds of income and capital, which maybe makes that they don't have the same kind of interests. So I have to say this because this actually goes for each of the theories that I will discuss now, because they're all kind of based on this idea of the precariat. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Well, I put this in to make it a little bit lighter. So Guy Standing, the guy who wrote this book, actually is known not so much for writing about the precariat, but because of a Wikipedia meme. Here you see, Guy Standing, economist, Guy Standing, and then underneath it says, Guy Standing sitting. And this is a serious Wikipedia war. People are putting Guy Standing sitting, and then the moderators are removing sitting, and then they put it back. There's an episode of 99% Invisible about this, I believe. You can listen back to it if you're interested. Okay. Yes, we arrive at the creative industry. So a growing group of young creatives identifies with this idea of the creative industries. The flexible and creative thinking that made them so creative in the first place, and the fact that they don't want to sit still and just do nothing, makes them extremely enterprising. They see opportunities, they want to take initiative, they find their way, sometimes easily and sometimes with great difficulty, on the market. Precariously but free, they live from gig to gig, hopping between side jobs and cheap studios. Their precarious existence is embellished by silver laptops, inspirational posters, impressive internships, self-help books, chai lattes, productivity apps, and a portfolio of 128 pages, and other kinds of outward displays of cultural entrepreneurship. They try to shape their own lives with the resources they have, staying positive, seeing solutions, developing innovative business models. They might still try and find their way into public institutions and funding bodies, but also experiment with crypto, crowdfunding, and corporate assignments. Thanks to this focus on freedom, flexibility, and self-reliance, the difference between precarious work and self-employment gradually blurs until it eventually becomes imperceptible. There is no more difference between being an entrepreneur of the self and being a creative. Thus, these cultural workers are initiated into what Silvio Russo has nicely called the Entreprecariat. We can go to the next slide. This is also, I think, so this is what the book is called. Everyone is an entrepreneur, nobody is safe. Welcome to the Entreprecariat. This is also the core of what autonomy means in the neoliberal sense, dogmatically staying positive, thinking in solutions, business models, and innovation with the inexhaustible belief that one will manage to make it on their own. The members of creative industries compatible Entreprecariats mine cryptos, raise money for crowdfunding campaigns, create art market art for the ultra-rich, make food for food art festivals, draw mangas on Twitch, make documentaries about social design, sell ecologically sustainable merchandise, design virtual fashion, have a following on Patreon or Substack. They sell books at independent art book fairs, and they create NFTs. There's nothing wrong with trying your luck in the creative industries, I think, and if you happen to make good money, good for you. It can happen. But we cannot ignore the fact that this individual declaration of autonomy in the creative industries often comes down to dependence on the market, with the artist in practice often just being happy to work for a platform, visibility, and a tiny income. In the fusion of autonomy and entrepreneurship, the art ethos, even though we thought it was dead in the creative industries, comes back through the back door. One has to make sacrifices to be able to do one's dream job, it is called now. This transformation means that autonomy has become the responsibility of the individual, financially as well as intrinsically. You're allowed to have your autonomous, non-lucrative practice as long as in addition to that, you also participate in society in a productive way, according to the market. A serious problem here is that an individualized notion of independence or autonomy plays right into the hands of the managerial instrumentalization of art, a self-regulating sector or art industry where people take care of each other in perfect harmony with the market, read where cultural workers divide their poverty among themselves, is right up the alley of the neoliberal manager. The Entreprecarian, in other words, is the perfect neoliberal subject. We can go to the next slide. Okay, in between. Next slide again, please. Right, so an illustration of autonomy today, made by Yuri Firman, one of the people who founded Platform BK, the organization I work for. Next slide again, please. Oh, you want to see it a little bit? So, autonomous artists, please choose your preferred dependency. You want to depend on the government, a sponsor, public funding, a client, rich parents, or a gallery. Okay, we can continue. So the next theory I wanted to touch upon is that of the projectariat, which was coined by Kuba Schroeder to, once again encapsulate the inherent contradictions of the profession that we call artist. In this class of the projectariat, Schroeder, who's from Poland, includes those artists, curators, academics, writers, assistants, and technicians who earn their livelihood moving between short-term contracts or commissions. And of course, the point there is that that's the vast majority of all art professionals. Projectarians experience a contradictory privilege. And this is also kind of nice. It shows this kind of core of art world living. It shows this contradiction. On the one hand, projectarians are often highly mobile. They are carried around the world in international circuits of contemporary art, along with some of the wealthiest of the so-called 1%, but their work is also insecure. Typically, they are also laden with debt, incurred to pay for the institutional credentials required to access this mobile kind of existence. Projectarians therefore make up a kind of poverty jet set, for whom the specter of impoverishment looms as each project ends, making the project the dominant structure of the factor dominant structuring factor in their lives. While I mentioned Kuba Schroeder's book, I also wanted to share his really beautiful and sharply ironic concept of artisan, which is yet another portmanteau. It combines the Polish term for artist, artista, with the brand name for communist-era insecticide spray, muchozol. I don't know, did you have it here? I guess not, no. So, art world events create, according to Schroeder, clouds of artisol, and the intoxicating fumes are typically supposed to sustain art workers in place of actual remuneration. The term artisol vividly evokes the allure of the contemporary art and the strange relationship between the toxicity and the intoxication that surrounds the international art world. The critical point is that contemporary art's heady extravaganza of free market values depends on banal exploitation. And actually, that the projectariat produces the very artisol that perpetuates its own exploitation. So, let's move on. Already in the 2000s, and I promise we will get a little bit brighter. It's a lot to take down. Also, I think it's a little bit therapeutic to just talk through all the shit today and then to get to work together on the cooperative later. So let's just take it all. Did you skip one? No. Okay, I forgot to include one slide. I'm sorry for that. I wanted to show here the book Soul at Work by Franco Biffa Berardi from I think 2009. Because already in the early 2000s, in this book, Biffa, the Italian post-workerist autonomous thinker, has coined the definition of the cognitariat. He basically stipulates that creatives are the new production line workers, occupying their dedicated spot in the global, fully digital conveyor belt. The cognitariat deals with entirely new forms of alienation. They are not alienated from their bodies, as the conveyor belt worker in the 20th century was, or still today is, but an alienating bifurcation, or split, occurs in their soul. The cognitarian is coerced into cultivating and performing exactly the right amount of instrumental creativity and uniqueness. Everyone in this cognitarian thinks that they are so unique with their all having the same silver laptop, right? And they think they're also unique because they work in a coffee place and around them there's exactly the same kind of workers doing exactly the same kind of work. This is the alienation he's kind of addressing. But then, the subtitle of Bifo's work is From Precarity to Autonomy. And I think this is important, because it's a different kind of autonomy than 19th century dreaming art world autonomy. Bifo's theory gives a whole new dimension to the theory of artists as the flex word avant-garde that I proposed earlier. To his understanding, precarity is the dominant form of government of our current late-stage capitalism. Precarity, he says outright, is an era. If this is true, it must be possible to catch glimpses of another world through the cracks of this political reality. And this is maybe our way out, yes, or assignment for these days as well. On that same kind of like dreams of alternatives, I wanted to also discuss one last theory of the affectariat. It's the last one for today, I promise, and I'll keep it brief with this one. The idea of the affectariat was coined by A.T. Kingsmith in 2018. He uses it to describe the crisis of present-day left-wing movements. Our tactics, according to Kingsmith, don't work anymore because they fail to connect to the fundamental anxiety and boredom people feel online or generally in the digital era. In a nutshell, Kingsmith proposes that reconnecting to these effects should be the leitmotif for a new left-wing movement. We can go into that more later, but I'll leave there for now. Included a nice, cute illustration. Yeah, okay. So this graph that he has, it says underneath figure 1, the terrain of anxiety, perceived as, I can't even read it, and then there's two axes that create this, even though there's 3 dimensions, there's 2 axes. The x-axis is time, perceived as linear, and the y-axis is status, perceived as material. And so at the top of the pyramid, we have socially included, fear of loss of status. Then in the middle, we have socially marginal, fear of loss of subsistence. And then at the bottom, we have socially autonomous or excluded, fear of state of violence or repression. So we can go to the next slide. We come here with these kind of questions, right? How will an artist make a living in the 21st century? Can we imagine a sustainable art economy beyond precarity? How would this change the circulation of artworks, the curriculum of art and design academies, the exhibition programs of museums, and the organization of collectives and unions? These are also some of the questions that are most important in my research. So I have to say, well, they're very important to me and very urgent, but I also know that more and more art workers don't really dare asking them because they feel there are so many more urgent problems around us. In the words of Majsa Imamovic, who's an artist and digital creative, I guess, she says, a precarious worker is always doomed to feel guilty in their own unique way. And I too have felt this disenchantment of facing harsh economic reality of artwork in the context of a never-ending cascade of crises, even in the privileged north of the Netherlands. You know, looking around and seeing climate disaster, the COVID pandemic, the wars in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, the economic recession we're entering right now, and the global rise of authoritarianism. How can we even feel entitled to, discuss fair art production for a small group in this pretty fucked up world? So in 2022, the Collins Dictionary's word of the year was permacrisis, defined as an extended period of instability and insecurity, especially one resulting from a series of catastrophic events, which I think quite well describes our situation today. And I like this idea of permacrisis, especially because it brings home the point that we should let go of any hope that present-day crises are temporary and that they can be dealt with by means of management. The stack of crises, as Geert Loving calls it, it's my boss in the Netherlands, is here to stay. As we are speaking, Gaza is under siege. There's more slavery and plantation work today than at any point in history, in exact numbers. And activists of Extinction Rebellion, Lesser Generation, and Just Stop Oil never fail to remind us that, we can go to the next slide, There's no art on a dead planet. Once again, how the hell can we feel entitled to talk about fair art production for a small group of privileged people in this fucked up world? The popular answer today would be art needs to help solving the crisis we face, right? But wait, hadn't we noticed right at the start of this lecture that 40 years of creative industries bullshit had not helped anyone? That reducing art to the loop of society is useless. But by circling back, we are coming closer to the root of the problem, I believe. From every side, art exceptionalism is attacked. The political left contests it as a plaything for the privileged, and I think rightly so, because I'm on that left. Well, okay. While the right presents art as a leech of social systems, right? You're just taking the subsidies, taking the jobs at the same time. Appeasing both sides, the creative industries ideology has stepped in and has turned art and culture into a profitable endeavor for the so-called social good. So I think we can conclude that it is the one and the same crisis of imagination, that is the inability to somehow forgo the social exceptionalism of art, that has given birth to the creative industries discourse and has also enabled the precarization of art workers by means of social delegitimization. That means that I think we need an urgent reboot of our ideas around art, work, and income in opposition to creative industries ideology. At the risk of being cynical, I would therefore propose to use the perma-crisis as an opportunity to recontextualize art practice, to redefine autonomy and solidarity, and to clarify the role of art in society as an important public good. This is also where I would position the idea of economic sustainability, which is kind of the scope of my research. Beyond the idealization of the precarious genius, beyond fine art exceptionalism, and beyond the instrumentalization of creative industries ideology. So before going into the conversation, and also today I will not mention any kind of examples of what I believe are prefigurative practices, even though I can maybe show some at the very end, but I would like to give some scope of the theory that we can use to really realize this recontextualization. Because there are many theories and practices that we can build on to explore future scenarios. In the past years, we've seen a rise of so-called heterodox economies. They were also already mentioned yesterday a little bit in the introduction round. For instance, Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century, Kate Raworth's Donut Economy, and even the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. All of these challenge the dominant norms of permanent growth. GDP is the dominant measure of how economies are doing, and the Big Mac Index, just among other kind of normal economic concepts. It has become mainstream to support concrete utopias like universal basic income and common practice. I don't know if you see this around you, but I very strongly see it around me in the Netherlands, that even moderate progressive liberals are embracing the idea of UBI right now, which also says something about the idea of UBI, but that's not the conversation today. What I wanted to discuss with you today, before going into conversation, is the most inspiring book that I've for sure read in this field of heterodox economies, which we can go to the next slide, is Justin O'Connor's, this one. Justin O'Connor's Reset, A New Beginning for Art and Culture, or Art, Culture, and the Foundational Economy. O'Connor's book is based on the work of the Foundational Economy Collective, or FEC for short. The FEC distinguishes 4 zones within each economy, each one with different principles, ways of working, and objectives. The core economy of family and community, 1. 2, the foundational economy of material and providential essentials. 3, the overlooked economy, like haircuts, sofa production, holidays. And 4, the tradable economy. Each of these zones is fundamental to a thriving society, but only the tradable economy, so only the 4th and last one, can be simply left to be governed by the more or less regulated market competition. So positivist research by the FEC shows that the tradable economy covers about 30 to 40% of the total economy in most countries around the world. That means that imposing free market ideology on the remaining 60 to 70%, the majority of our economies, which they call the foundational economy, is not just illogical, but it will simply not work. So in Reset, O'Connor's project is to describe how culture mostly belongs to the foundational economy and should be governed accordingly. In the past 40 years, culture has been caught, and this is a citation, caught between being seen as a thriving consumer industry and as a soft, somewhat weird area of government policy, end of quote. He states, another quote, as long as culture as an object of public policy remains a limping, dysfunctional, underperforming industry, its ability to contribute to the future will be hampered, end of quote. To remedy this situation, we must assert the position of culture within the foundational economy. For sustainable prosperity, we need food, shelter, hygiene, but also social interaction, transport, education, and affection, and yes, also culture. Some parts of the cultural sector, such as blockbuster movies or art actions, could be left to the market. It's fine, maybe. But most of art and culture, from museums to amateur theater companies, to the domain of belong to a domain of, he calls it common luxury or collective luxury, that contributes to the reinvention of solidarity, citizenship, and the good life, and that is crucial for social reproduction. So, it makes economic, social, and governmental sense to treat culture as a social fundament. This premise is, I think, convincingly defended by Reset, and I think maybe we all kind of understand this here, but it's still refreshing to read a theory that actually really works it out in the details. Also, this premise is convincingly defended in Reset by developing a refreshingly fundamental vision in which O'Connor rethinks through the argument completely, meaning a reevaluation of culture or a new social license. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. A new social license, as O'Connor calls it, can only be brought about as part of a broad reform agenda to establish a basic public infrastructure that includes universal basic income, there we have it again, good public education, and distribution of resources through Citizens' Council. That's what O'Connor says. But seriously, this is seriously the beauty of O'Connor's book, is that he, in very moderate terms, preaches a really far-going collectivization of the economy in a way that the social democrat will actually be sensitive to it. This is the magic of the book. So in doing so, O'Connor avoids any form of social exceptionalism for culture, and moreover proposes to tackle at the root problems such as exclusion, right? Diversity and inclusion issues, lack of representation, and erosion of democratic control in cultural institutions through the rise of patronage and so on. In short, a new beginning for art and culture does not start with culture. It starts with a new social base in society. Now, what should we do with that? I fully agree with O'Connor. We can go on. Yeah, just some illustrations. I fully agree with O'Connor. Art and culture should be governed fundamentally differently, as should the rest of society. Of course, I don't think that means that we should just now sit and wait, or just wait until the revolution happens, but instead we can get to work with prefigurative practices that help bring about the world that we seek to create. Your bad career decision, I think, is a good start. Congratulations. But we don't have to stop there. Prefigurative practices happen autonomously, collectively, interdependently, and in solidarity, and they should always, always go hand in hand with the political organizing required to make public and political claims. And this is, I think, where often it goes wrong. Okay, let's just go in our corner and do our own thing and not make any claim anymore. Or let's make claims and not do anything around us anymore. We always need these two approaches at the same time. My objective in my research and also in being here with you today, I think, is to identify, theorize, amplify, and contribute to these kind of prefigurative practices. And in my case, I use the scope of economic sustainability. And I just wanted to mention, without going into further detail, this is really the last paragraph, that in imagining a better art economy, 4 ideas have become especially popular over the past decade within the art world, and I think we can build on these in various extents. I'm thinking of the notions of commons, cooperatives, basic income, and infrastructural critique. And just to leave you, I wanted to show a few examples. So this is the Lumbung system developed by Documenta 15, which probably you've all heard of, but it was curated and facilitated by Indonesian collective Ruang Grupa through this idea of the Lumbung, which is the Indonesian word for a rice barn, where people put their excess rice from their own little pasture and share it as a community resource. And they actually approach the whole of the Documenta exhibition as a Lumbung, as a surplus resource to be collectively managed, owned, and used to their collective benefits. And there was actually an economic system to underpin this. We can go into that maybe into more detail tomorrow. If we go to the next one. Another example I'll bring up tomorrow is that of the Bread Fund, this Dutch self-employed workers kind of self-organizing sick leave insurance in a way that's much cheaper than doing it through a private company, based on solidarity and trust and cooperative principles. There are also critiques to be made of this initiative, but I think it's an interesting example. Of course, we have, or maybe even one further, we have in the Netherlands a long tradition of squatting and cooperative management of and ownership and management of cooperatively owned real estate, also for art, such as this place W139 in Amsterdam that I can say a little bit more about and that we can also build on. Is there anything more? Oh yeah, we have artists actually making art campaigns for universal basic income. So not just artist basic income, but universal basic income, or maybe from feminist perspectives, universal basic services rather than income. That kind of avoids the sovereign consumer that UBI creates. But you were in contact with Emanuela for our next session, so I'm sure if he's in this collective, he can tell you more about it. Is this the last one? Okay, good. Then I want to thank you for your attention and for giving me the opportunity to share this here with you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. But if you would rather, what shall we do? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and I'm here all day, so just keep your questions, come to me. And thank you.